Hello everyone, Mason here. Today is a first for me. I was tagged by Billy Bonsai over on his channel to do the Early Habits Booktube tag. I'm actually quite excited about this one. It allows for some self-reflection and a chance to talk about something that's actually quite meaningful. So I actually really appreciate the tag, Billy. Question 1 is, what were you like as an early and learning reader? So to start off with, I don't have the best memory. When it comes to my really early childhood, I don't necessarily remember how much I read and what I was like as a reader, but it's safe to say after a certain point the right word would be eager. I loved reading and I'd do it whenever and wherever possible. In my bedroom, in the living room, in the kitchen, in the car to and from school, at school, in lessons, in the dinner hall, inside or outside, day or night, it really didn't matter. And if you knew me back then, it really wouldn't have been uncommon to find me with my face buried in whatever book I was reading at the time. It's quite funny to look back on, really. I was such a stubborn young man. Despite the fact that my vision was very limited, a lot of the time I still refused to use magnifiers and other visual aids. I just held the book really close to my face, and the older I got, the closer I had to hold the book because my vision was slowly getting worse. My head would cast shadows on the page, making it harder to read. I had to hold whatever I was reading in uncomfortable positions to get the right angle, but I still did it because I loved it. I couldn't get enough of finding new characters to be friends with and new worlds to live in. I took quite a lot of pride in my reading ability. I think I enjoyed the fact that people were generally impressed. When it came to more logical subjects like maths and science, I was never really that good, but when it came to English class, I enjoyed it. I was pretty good at it. To be honest, it was probably fairly annoying to be in an English class with me, because I was definitely the Hermione Granger of the class. Now I don't mean that in a big-headed way. I'm not sitting here trying to say, yeah mate, I was the best in the class, but I was definitely eager. I was the one with my hand held high in the air, desperate to get that answer right. I think my love of reading was, at least in part, a form of escapism. I had plenty of friends in school. I was confident and outgoing, maybe even a little bit too much sometimes. I'm sure occasionally it came across as me trying way too hard. Most of my school friends lived in the immediate area of the school we attended, but I lived around a 20-minute drive away. And the kids on the council estate where I lived weren't always the friendliest, so in the weekdays I couldn't just hang out with my school friends once school was over. So I spent a lot of time in my room having adventures and exploring different worlds. When I was feeling lonely, or had a bad day at school, or had some bad news about my visual impairment, reading made it easy to just forget about it for a while. I had a cabinet in my bedroom that had 4 shelves. The top shelf was books that I hadn't read but wanted to, prioritised from left to right in order that I wanted to get to them. The middle shelf was books that I had read but wanted to read again, prioritised in the same way but grouped by author and series. The third shelf was books that I wasn't as eager to get to, and non-fiction, because I've never been that big a reader of non-fiction. And then the bottom shelf was DVDs and music. It's funny to think of that cabinet. I am not a very organised person. Those bookshelves were probably the most organised that I've ever been, and even then, it's the most basic way of organising them that I can possibly think of. I did spend a lot of time in the library reading through blurbs, trying to find something new to read, but the truth is, I read certain books over and over again. There are certain series that I love that I always go back to, even to this day. I still see the benefits of doing so. There's always a new perspective, a new element to the plot, a new aspect of a familiar character that you've never seen before. I think that last point brings me quite nicely to question 2, which is what book or book series got you really excited to read as a kid? I really wish I had a cool answer. Some obscure series that you'll have never heard of, but the truth is, I don't. I really don't. I did a lot of reading in high school, and a lot of that reading was young adult stuff. I actually still enjoy young adult now, even though I'm 27 years old. I just think that it's a good genre. I am pretty touchy about certain subjects, and I find that young adult just tends to be easy reading a lot of the time. Although I'm not a massive fan of the spy genre, I read both the Cherub series by Robert Muchamore, which is about orphans who get used as spies, and the Alex Rider series by Anthony Horowitz, which is a book series about an orphan that gets used as a spy. I actually really enjoyed the Alex Rider series. Alex himself is a really cool protagonist, there's some good villains, some good action, and it was just generally a good time. Having said that, I also never finished it off. I read up to Scorpio, which I think is book 5, and then moved on and never went back. Who knows, maybe one day I will. We'll see. I also read the Power of 5 series, which is also by Anthony Horowitz, and I reread that just last year and enjoyed it just as much as I did as a teenager. It's a series that I'd actually highly recommend to anyone who hasn't read it. It's got some spooky horror elements, prophecies, destiny, kids saving the world, all that good stuff. I was also a fan of Darren Shan. I was introduced to him by a friend of mine, and so I read the Cirque du Freak series first and really enjoyed it. In fact, that's another series that I've read again just a few years ago and still thought it was bloody good. I really enjoyed Darren's take on vampires. I thought it had some really cool stuff, some great world building, and in general was just a lot of fun. However, when it comes to Darren Shan, I'd say that I enjoyed his Demon Arter series far more, and that is a surprise because I'm a wuss when it comes to horror, and the Demon Arter's got some pretty gruesome scenes in it. Although it'd be classed as young adult, I don't think it's one that you want to let your really young children read. It's got some great monsters, and really short books too. I remember polishing off at least one of them within an afternoon. It's probably unsurprising for someone my age to say, but I was, of course, a huge Harry Potter fan. It's one of the first series I can remember reading, loving, having in common with my friends, and it was one of the first communities that I was a part of when I was old enough to start using the internet. I spent a staggering amount of time on the MuggleNet forums, and to be honest, I probably read far too much fanfiction. It's a series that I've read multiple times over the years, and I've had different perspectives on it each time. I think it's fair to say that I've grown less fond of it as I've gotten older, but I still appreciate the huge impact that it had on my younger self. It was awesome to have that sense of wonder and companionship as I made my way through the series, and it was great to have a series in common with my friends that we could have long conversations about. I still remember a time when I was in a taxi on the way home from school, and the driver made me put the Chamber of Secrets away because he didn't want me reading a book about witchcraft in his car. It was so weird. Then there's the number 1, the best, the most beloved. I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy at 8 years old, and it had a huge impact. In the 19 years since then, I've gone back to it so many times, and I know in the future I'll keep going back to it. It's a series that I've got a deep love for and a near obsession with. I might put it away for a little while, but then I'll see a video about it, or someone will mention it to me, and I'll relapse, and I'll spend hours and hours and hours looking into it, trying to learn more about Middle-earth, because the truth is, no matter how much I go back, I still don't know as much about Tolkien's creation as I'd like to. I don't think it's possible to tell you in a short video how I feel about The Lord of the Rings. It's something that I never get tired of talking about, and I don't think there'll ever be a series that I love more. Question 3 is, has there been a person in your life, real or fictional, that inspired you to be a reader? Once again, I don't have a hot take here. It seems to be a common theme in these early habits videos, but the people that turned me into a reader were my parents. My mum isn't necessarily an avid reader, but she appreciated the importance. She knew that I loved it, and she took the time to read Harry Potter to me. It was our series. She read it to me chapter by chapter, and we made our way through to the Order of the Phoenix, at which time my brother was born. And unfortunately, I became impatient. Rather than waiting for her to read it to me the way that she had done before, I powered on ahead without her. And after that, we never really read it together again. Looking back, I wish that I'd had that patience to wait so that we could have experienced the whole series together. But I'll always be super grateful to her for taking the time to introduce me to something that I loved. On the other hand, my dad is an avid reader and a fantasy fan. I know he loves The Wizard of Earthsea, which I've never got around to reading, but hopefully one day I will. One day I saw him reading Lord of the Rings, and I wanted to read it. He told me that I should read The Hobbit first, and if I enjoyed that I could move on to the trilogy. And yeah, I enjoyed The Hobbit, and I moved on to the trilogy. Our shared love of The Lord of the Rings is something that we've spent hours talking about over the years, and it's something that we've bonded over. Question 4 is, when did you start to identify as a reader? To be honest, I feel like I always have. As I mentioned earlier, I've not got the best memory, and I don't have a lot of really strong memories before the age of 7 or 8ish, by which time I know that Mum was already reading me Harry Potter, and then I read The Lord of the Rings, and I've just never looked back since, and I feel like I've always thought of myself as someone that likes reading. Question 5 is, how has reading shaped your life and your worldview? I love this question. It's deep, and I've done a lot of thinking about it. It's actually quite hard to answer in a short way, but I'll do my best anyway. The answer is so many ways, maybe even every way, to be honest. I'm not sure who I would be if I hadn't discovered reading, because reading gave me a love for creativity, and I do love creativity in all its forms. Over the years, I've tried writing my own stories so many times, and although they never go anywhere because I inevitably end up suffering from writer's block and abandoning the project, I just enjoy the art of crafting characters and thinking of new worlds and storytelling. I have an immense respect and sometimes a deep jealousy for the people that can actually do it, and I'd love to be able to do it myself. As a teenager, I was in a few bands, and I always really loved writing songs. I spent a lot of time doing that. I actually really like some spoken word poetry and some rap music because I love the percussion of words, the rhythm, the flow, the emotion, the way a sentence sounds when you put it together. I love film and TV, the way actors can take a character from the page and bring them to life in ways that you never even imagined. In the past, I've even done little bits of radio. Even though I can't do it myself, I have a massive respect for people that can dance, people that can paint and draw and sing. I just love the self-expression that comes from creating. Even though the things that I've just mentioned aren't necessarily to do with reading, I don't feel like I would have learned to appreciate any of them if I hadn't found my love for reading first. I think another massive way in which reading has shaped me as a person is empathy. I am a very empathetic person. I sometimes joke that I'm an opposite psychopath. I connect to people too much. I form deep connections with people, whether they're real or fictional, and it's not that hard to elicit an emotional response out of me. I remember when I was reading The Hobbit for the first time, I reached the part where Bilbo has his disagreement with the dwarves, and I went downstairs crying to my mum because Bilbo and the dwarves weren't friends anymore. Despite the fact that I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy multiple times, every time I reach the climax on Mount Doom with Frodo utterly broken from the burden that he's had to bear, Sam carrying him up, Gollum pursuing them as this twisted, broken, pitiable thing, I still cry every time. It gets me every single time. The last time that I listened to the trilogy was the first time that I'd listened to it since becoming completely blind. Now, the story is too long to tell in full right now, but it's safe to say that the last few months that I had some vision were not a good time for me. I could only see out of my right eye at that time, and it was failing. It was physically painful, and for the last 5 months I was in a lot of pain every day. And as the time went on, it got harder to deal with. When I went back to the trilogy that last time, the empathy that I felt for Frodo was intense. For the first time, I felt like I connected more to Frodo than I did to Sam. To me, it felt like the ring was a metaphor for the pain that I'd felt during those months. And I felt like it gave me a deeper understanding of what it must have been like to be Frodo during that time. The climax on Mount Doom was so emotional that time around. In the end, I had surgery to remove that eye, and the pain went away, but just like Frodo would never be the same again after what he'd been through, neither would I. It was impossible to go through something like that and come out the other end the same person. That's one of the reasons why I love reading. Like I said earlier, there are always new perspectives from which to look at a familiar story. That experience only increased my love for the trilogy. I feel like reading taught me the value of friendship. The stories that I love are always ones with strong friendships in. Growing up, I always wanted to be somebody's Sam. Reading taught me the value of other people, to try and look at things from other people's points of view, to be kind, to try to be a good person, and if I make mistakes, there's always a chance of redemption. Reading taught me to keep my head held high and keep on going when things get hard. I've learned so many lessons from reading, and I'm sure that I'll never run out of lessons to learn. Well, I went longer than expected with this. Probably longer than necessary, but I hope that you feel like it's given you the chance to get to know me better than you did before. Once again, I'd like to say thank you to Billy Bonsai for tagging me, because I've had such a good time with this. That leads me to the last thing that's left to do, which is to tag somebody else. A recent subscriber to the channel was Scott from Book Invasion, and after checking out his channel, he seems to have some really cool content, and he's already recommended a book that I'd like to try. I'd like to get to know more about you, Scott, so it's your turn. I'll leave links to both Billy and Scott's channel in the description. I really hope you've enjoyed yourself as much as I have today. If you have, say hi in the comments section and we'll have a chat. Then you can use your most powerful spell on the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss any future content. Thanks so much for spending time with me today, guys. Until next time, take care. For now, I'm off, and you should have a good one.